Thank you. It's good to see such a good turnout here. We were just talking here briefly before and said, you know, with such a boring topic, I can't imagine that this many people would show up. But then I saw the food in the back, and it is a pretty good spread. So I think that helps out a lot. Stacy does a good job. And I do want to say a big kudos to Stacy for managing the Conservation Alliance. She's really done a good job of bringing this program into the forefront. And I would also like to give a shout out to Kim McHugh, Dr. Kim McHugh, who really spearheaded all of this with the Conservation Alliance in taking what Dr. Laddie Core had looked at with the future of Arizona and saying this fits right in the wheelhouse of what people are concerned about in this state, and that's sustainability, outdoor recreation, and the environment. So this becoming one of the top 5 projects in that institute-led effort, I think, speaks highly for us. And so hopefully we will talk about one of the key issues, and that is really looking at theory of land management and planning, and then trying to apply that. And as Stacy said, what we want to talk about is recreation opportunity spectrum, limits of acceptable change. Those are 2 frameworks and models that we use, but really a whole host of other models and frameworks that we use in planning and management. So what we're going to bring this around to at the very end is what we like to talk about in our department is adaptive management, and using all of these frameworks and the goods and bads of them. And I think a lot of you will start talking about limits of acceptable change, recreation opportunity spectrum, and level of service. And you'll look at what you're doing in your parks and recreation agencies and natural resource agencies and say, well, we do that, we just don't call it that. So we'll kind of bring that around at the very end. But first, I want to just kind of set the context, if you will, with Maricopa County Parks and Recreation Department, so you can see kind of where we're coming from and what we have to work with. Most of you, I think, probably know this. First, before we start, how many, just so we can get a better sense of gauging our discussion and our talk today, how many folks are Parks and Recreation professionals or work for Parks and Recreation agencies in here? Okay, how many more from the science-based side of things, you know, the universities? Okay, great. And what others that I haven't hit?
Education.
Education.
Volunteers.
Volunteers, awesome, we love our volunteers. Others? Okay, good. So we've got a real nice cross-section then too of what the Conservation Alliance is all about. So anyway, our parks number 11 currently, and they ring the Phoenix metropolitan area. Let's see. Oh, it even has a laser pointer, great. White Tank Mountain Park is our largest regional park. That is roughly 30,000 acres of parkland. Going down to Spurcross Ranch, which is one of our smallest areas, which is a partnership acquisition between Arizona State Parks, the town of Cave Creek, and Maricopa County Parks and Recreation Department. But interestingly enough, that's the most diverse park we have from an ecological standpoint in our entire system. So it's 10% the size of White Tank Park, but it has more diversity, at least from a flora standpoint, than a 30,000 acre park. And that's primarily due, or at least one of the reasons is because of the riparian zone in the park, but also the huge elevation change within a very small area in the park. So then we have Lake Pleasant. Obviously, most of you probably know Lake Pleasant. That is our busiest park by far. We get about 550 to 600,000 visitors to Lake Pleasant every year. All of those parks total 120,000 acres of parkland. We are currently working over next to the city of Wickenburg on a park called the Vulture Mountain Park and Recreation Area with the Bureau of Land Management. That will add another 71,000 acres to our park system. So we'll be up at around 190,000 acres of parkland. That project it's a legacy project, it's a lifetime project, so don't look for it anytime soon to be opening up visitor centers and things like that, but we are in the planning phases of that. And for those of you that, do we have any BLM folks here? Okay. For those of you that have worked with BLM, it kind of moves slowly. So we're continuing to work with that, but we're also working with the Nature Conservancy, and if you know of the Hassayampa River Preserve along the Hassayampa River, that will become part of the Vulture Mountain area. So we're very excited about that, adding, really that one has from a desert riparian zone all the way up to a desert peak of about 3,500 feet. So we're really excited about the education opportunities and the natural resource opportunities along with recreational opportunities. Anyway, I could go on about Vulture forever. Annual visitation in our park system this last year was about 1.9 million visits. Just some kind of fun facts. You know, here's the population of the city of Phoenix, larger than San Antonio, San Diego, Dallas. And then surprisingly enough, we're actually relatively close in visitation numbers to the entire Arizona State Park system, and they have 30 parks in their system throughout the state. So that gives you a little perspective. Size of the park system, as I mentioned, about 120,000 acres or 188 square miles of parkland. Again, some kind of fun facts. And then when we add Vulture Mountain, as I mentioned, 71,000 acres, we'll have about 297 square miles of parkland in Maricopa County. And I'll put a qualifier that actually our park system is in 3 counties. We're in Yavapai County, half of Lake Pleasant is in Yavapai County, and Santan Mountain Regional Park is fully in Pinal County. So we do span the borders. All of that is done with 84 full-time staff. That includes all of our administrative staff, that includes all of our park rangers, that includes all of our maintenance staff. I'm glad to see the volunteers here because we literally double our staff every year with volunteer hours that we have. We also have a number of concessionaires that are in our parks, and if you were to add all of those folks in, our staffing numbers may total around 400 people or so. Another thing, when we start talking about adaptive management and also using some of these frameworks, really a key thing for us is looking at our funding sources. And one of the things that I want to point out here, our budget runs anywhere from $6.5 to $7 million a year for operating. So it's a fairly small budget. Again, we do a lot with volunteers. We do a lot of concessionaire management opportunities that add to our recreation offering and our services. And our concessionaires do a lot of maintenance in the park as well. But if you look at one key number here, our general fund budget from the county is 13%. Other sources, grants, permits, things like that, we get 10% from. The bulk comes from entry fees at 28%, and our annual passes, we add another 7% to that. Camping fees, we generate about 20% of our income from. And then concessionaires, we generate about 20% of our income from as well. So that's a pretty key thing when you look at how do you manage our county park system. This plays into many of our management objectives and how we look at managing our park system. So what we want to get to today is really the, oh, you want to see that again? The little, the balancing act. That was Jennifer. So everything that we do, about 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, we redid our system master plan for the county parks, and we revised our mission statement and we revised our vision statement. And our vision for the parks is really to balance the environment with the people. Making sure that we're connecting people to nature is our vision. The number one phrase in our mission statement, however, is stewardship. So it's always about balancing, connecting people with nature, but taking care of those natural resources, and you don't want to do one at the expense of the other. So it's really a fine balancing act for us. So here's the balancing act between people and the environment. And people, we talk about that, again, the economic side of things too, though. What kind of revenues do they come in? And then how do we balance that against environmental protection? And so we always have to look at that then from a planning side and from a management side. Oh, and we're even getting the light here so we get the good skin tones. And with that, I'm going to turn it over, but right before I turn it over, I just want to say, again, we have a small department, but we have one of the most extraordinary planners in the state, one of the most extraordinary operations managers in the state, and I'm really happy that they're here today, and I'm happy to work with them. I think they're going to give you a lot of good information. Okay?
There are a number of planning tools that are available, many of which have overlapping elements to them. But today we'll discuss two that provide a means to better defend our management actions. And they're tools that we can all use and adapt to our own needs. The first one, I'm changing it up a little on you, Stacy, is Visitor Experience and Resource Protection, or VERP. And the purpose of that is it's a planning and management framework that focuses on visitor use impacts on the visitor experience and park resources. And the impacts are primarily attributable to visitor behavior, use levels, types of uses, the timing of their use, and even the location of their use. The other thing that I'll discuss quickly is WALROS, the Water and Land Recreation Opportunity Spectrum. And I'm going to kind of lump in just the plain old ROS in there and even the WROS, and just for the sake of today's argument, kind of lump them all together. So VERP has 9 elements to it. The first one is to assemble an interdisciplinary team. And actually, let me back up a little bit. VERP, it incorporates these 9 elements, and you can use it for the entire park, or you can even just, if you're having problems with a smaller area within a park, you can narrow it down to just even a smaller area within the overall park. So we always want to assemble our interdisciplinary team with people that know the park well and know that are maybe specialists with wildlife or plants and that kind of thing, so we get a good representation of what the park is and what issues are going on. We want to develop a public involvement strategy so that we get our visitors' feedback and their input into what we're doing. Develop statements of our park purpose, like RJ said, that kind of ties into your vision and your mission. And we also have themes for our parks, operating themes and marketing themes, and that's where you would want to tie those things into the decisions that you're going to eventually make for the park. And we want to analyze our park resources and the visitor use, describe our range of visitor experiences and our resource conditions, and put these things into management zones. And then we want to identify our indicators and standards for each zone, and then develop a monitoring plan so we can check on things and see how things are going. And then we actually want to go out and monitor these resources and then take some sort of management action. Now keep your eye on the bold items there, because you'll see those themes kind of repeat in the next slide here. And really you'll see a lot of these steps and elements here repeat in things that Jennifer will get to later on. But we'll go on here to WALROS, and again, kind of lumping in all the ROSs in there. Whoops, sorry, let me go back to it. So VERP is a means to address our visitors' use and carrying capacity issues. It provides consistency and allows the methodology to improve along the way. It's iterative, so even though those elements are numbered in the VERP manuals, you can go back and forth between steps as you need to. You don't just do them sequentially 1 through 9. And it provides a logic and rationale to our decision making. And what VERP is not is a step-by-step guide. It's not intended to be followed exactly every time at every park. And it's also not the final word. It's also up to the land managers to use their professional discretion in making decisions. So then we'll move on to WALROS here. That is divided up into 6 classifications, and there's also a scoring process along with it that's based on physical, social, and managerial aspects of the area. And it ranges from urban with highly developed areas like you see there to primitive to where there's little to no development. And it can be incorporated into management and really play a role in really any planning process that we do and when we're identifying our inventory. And just some examples, an opportunity that we provide is trails, but across the spectrum of trails, there's barrier-free where you have maybe a hardened surface, and then it can span the spectrum to rugged backcountry trails that are double black diamond and very hard and need some kind of skills to do. So trails is the opportunity. The spectrum is from, you know, easy trails to the very difficult. Another opportunity is camping, and that can range from highly developed, closely spaced RV sites where you have the full luxury hookups and water and sewer and all that stuff, to really remote backcountry camping. So it kind of runs that whole gamut everywhere in between. Walrose also acknowledges that there is no average visitor. Rather, visitors have a diversity of expectations. So don't try to be all things to all people, because we can't do it. What it does do is assure recreational quality and diversity by considering the visitor's experience and making sure that we're planning for that. It assists with programs and budget justifications, and it encourages adaptive management. What it does not do is complete the planning process. It's merely a tool that we use in our inventory phase. It does not provide a prescribed formula, but rather it's flexible and adaptable. And it does not replace management discretion or sound. It just helps us with our decision-making process. And I'll turn it over to Jenn here.
Management's my favorite thing. It's also the most diverse. It's the most challenging, and it's the most intriguing. You have to balance, like RJ had said, you've got these user groups out there that, by golly, I want this. And then you've got the land speaking to you saying, well, I can't hold this. I can't have you over here because there's a cliff, let's say, and you know the vegetation's very pristine. And we're trying to balance all of this. With the limits of acceptable change, can anybody tell me what year that was actually written? How long this has been around? It was created in 1985 by the Forest Service. So it's a really old tool, and that is the limits of acceptable change. One of the intriguing things about our agency is, and we'll allude to it more in the adaptive management explanation, is we get to combine all the different tools that are out there to find the best solution for any management issues that we have out there. So that's a really cool thing. But to the limits of acceptable change, the basic idea of it is that it's creating these standards or these measurable tools in order for managers to get to a certain point of desired outcome. So you basically want, let's say, a piece of property that's been highly abused. You want to get it back to a pristine condition, and I have examples for you. So there are 9 steps of the LAC, and I want to point out, of the 9 steps, there's some overarching 4 points that need to be made about this. The idea is to seek and specify what you're trying to do, to analyze your research and the surveys, we'll talk about that in a minute, to identify some actions that managers need to take to achieve those standards and those goals. And then the final outcome, obviously, is to monitor and evaluate your successes and then your failures, too. So the first step of an LAC is to identify your areas of concerns or issues. For us, in the Sonoran Desert, one of the biggest things we have to deal with in working with BLM, it really came to light, it was the desert tortoise habitat. We have to, because 95% of our property is from the BLM, so when we plan things, we are coordinating with them all the time. But we need to take into consideration some of the knowns when we're inventorying these. Critical habitat, your land users that are your land users that are next door. When you're planning, are you taking in consideration who is your neighbor? We have an eagle area at Lake Pleasant. So when we were planning the Agua Fria project, very near and dear to my heart, we need to consider that parameter and what we're planning in those areas. The next thing we need to do is define the opportunities or classes. This is the fun part because, as RJ said, it's really words. The WROS, the Walrus, the ROS, they will call it attributes. This one will call it steps, elements, factors. And so you just have to find what works for you for your terminology. But in the opportunity classes, this does parallel, it's bolded, it parallels with the concept of the Walrus or the ROS. This is looking at your physical, your resources, what you have on the ground. You need to look at that and say, what is this piece of land supposed to be providing? Is it an urban experience, like the 10-lane at Lake Pleasant, that looks like a little city on Saturday, 4th of July? Or is it the Agua Fria conservation area that we have? Is it semi-primitive? That means you can have some development. You define those, and you don't have to use those terms of urban and semi-developed and semi-urban. That's for your agencies to determine. The other thing you want to look at is what's socially occurring at this point. What are your users doing? What's the history? And this is really fun because at the lake when we did the WROS, we were like, oh, this is going to be an urban setting. Because by golly, we knew it was going to be that. Because on Saturday, you can't get there. We went out on Saturday, and it wasn't this urban environment. It was totally different. So it's knowing what you have, talking to your staff, seeing it yourself, going ahead and being okay with measuring those things. And the other opportunity class you need to look at is the managerial. What's occurring, what is you want to occur from that perspective of managing it. Look at the surroundings. If you go up to an urban setting, like the 10-lane that we have, and there's one sign that says, here's your parking area, but then there's nothing else to direct the user. Oh, here's your launch ramp. Here's the restrooms. You know, don't fish from the dock. You know, are all the manager things in place to make sure you have those taken care of? Another word for opportunity, besides these classes, is zones. What's your zones? Like we have primitive, semi-primitive, semi-developed. What are your zones that you define for your area? See, I told you I'd be good at long. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to determine what management is striving for. This is really the meat and potato of the people on the ground that are seeing these things. What is it that the desired outcomes are that the managers want for that property or your area? And when you're planning these things, look at them holistically and entirely. And it's okay to have different segments all throughout your entire park. You can have an urban setting in the front and then have a very primitive experience in the back. But you want to look at those as you're having your users get back into there. Take those into considerations. This is also where you're looking at, so you have your classes or your opportunities that are these primitive, semi-primitive, and then decide what factors you're really wanting to focus on. The Agua Fria conservation area that we have, we decided that we wanted to focus on the resource, because the Agua Fria conservation area was being completely destroyed, and you'll see that in a little bit. It was riddled with shotgun shells. They were going down there with semi-automatic weapons. So we wanted to know, we need to figure this out because this is unacceptable. And then we also wanted to take into consideration some of the social things, which was the user conflicts. You can't have a family camping in an area and then go down there and have weapons being discharged all in the river bottom. Not so hot. And then you take those in this section and decide what is it that you are wanting to get to? We had a bunch of trees being cut down in the Agua Fria. So that was something that we could measure systematically. We could say, oh, they've cut these tree branches. We could quadrant it off and look at it. We also wanted to know how many accidents were occurring. Those kinds of things come into play in your decision making as managers. This is also a good example to point out, we learn from each other, and you need to find other examples or models out there. For Vulture, on another project, we went and looked at the Arkansas headwaters with BLM on how they managed their project along the Arkansas River there. And that was a way that we could come back and learn from it and apply things that worked for them and then learn from their lessons learned. The next step is existing conditions. So with Agua Fria, what we decided to do, because we knew we were looking at the resource damage and the user conflicts and how we were kind of going, that the Agua Fria was, in its master plan, designed as a conservation area. And when I say conservation area, I'm sure you all get a certain idea of what that is. It definitely was not that now, and I'll go back to that. But the other item for existing conditions is you need to measure, find out what methodology you want to use to measure what's going on out there. What we did for Agua Fria was developed a survey that actually got implemented with cooperation of Game and Fish and our Parks Department. So they had staff out and we had staff out. We can, in a 6-week period, know exactly the percentage of users that were out there, whether they were swimming, boating, camping, illegally shooting, which they never admitted. You want to map these out too. This is how you plan your area. You want to take the concepts back, have your surveys go into particular areas that you're wanting to measure, and then bring them back into a visual concept that people can look at. You know, because looking at the table sometimes is good. So, the next thing we wanted to look at was standards. And this is self-explanatory. This is the point in which a baseline is established for what you want it to be, okay or not okay. So, and what I mean, you want to measure against it. So this is what you expect this area to look like, this is what you want it to be. And it's no different than writing like standards for performance plans. You know, you can go to that level of detail. We didn't necessarily do that with the Agua Fria, but we do know that we're comparing our standard to the definition of a conservation area as defined by the Bureau of Reclamation. So we know how to get to there. Again, it's all in people's ideas of words. But one thing I do want to point out about this section when you do create your standards of what you're trying to get to is they've got to be able to be measured and defendable. And you know the public's going to see these. So if we were to say white tank at the waterfall trail, one standard could be that we are okay as managers that 500 people can be out on the waterfall trail 85% of the time at that capacity for the winter months. I'm making up a number, but that's because we haven't gone to that detail. But those are the kinds of things that we are starting to talk about having Leigh on board, because this is exciting for our department to have Leigh wanting to help us with her background in achieving that. So you really need a good planning person on board. The next thing is the identification of the alternatives. And against your classes, this is basically the reality check. This is where you to start deciding, there's all these classes that you've decided as your agency is going to be, from urban, let's say, to all the way to primitive, and they may not be that way. But then you have to decide which ones are the ones that apply to that park in the wholest sense. The next thing is you want to analyze the benefits, the environmental impacts. This is where you're trying to find the differences between the existing conditions and the standards that you're trying to get to. And again, they're management actions that you're trying to develop to get you to this point, at this point. The next thing is the benefits and the costs and benefits of each alternative. Basically, you're choosing your final alternative at this point. And this one is, again, I want to point this one out because the Agua Fria was an interesting project, because when we got to the point of getting towards the end, our department was kind of saying, it's a conservation area. It's going to be that way. No one is going to come in, by golly. Well, at this point of the state, you know, when we started having, you have public input all along the way, we really liked the area, Game and Fish. This is a good place to go fishing because it's right at the, you know, the end of the Agua Fria River going into Lake Pleasant. Whoa, 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 whoa. You know, and people are really wanting to do this. So these are those points where you have to go, let's find the balance. Can we say, you can come to the Agua Fria River, but you're going to do it our way, which means it's only open when we have hosts there or staff there. Otherwise you walk in, which we're fine with, but you can't drive in. And then the last thing on this is obviously the implementation and the monitoring of a program. This is where you're going to evaluate, reevaluate, continue to get better, and grow. The example I'm going to give to that is, my pictures will tell you we're glorified a whole bunch of information at once when I show you these pictures. The Agua Fria was a total wreck, a total mess. Now it's closed and it's looking good. Do we think that those classes, those factors, those indicators, those attributes, those standards that you're trying to get to are going to start looking a little bit different? They could. So this is to always go back and learn from what you are doing and learn from others and learn from the models. This is the before, some of the before shots of the Agua Fria Conservation Area. So it's the Agua Fria River, which you can see behind the puddles. But this was a free-for-all location. We had all kinds of ATV activity. You talk about mud bogging galore, this is where it happened. Accidents out our ears. The trash, these were diapers, soda pops, you know, garbage from their house. We had sofas, everything left under the mesquite bosques along the river. They were shooting and taking hatchets to our saguaros, and we have some, I guess you'd call them historical eucalyptus, and they were cutting them down right and left and taking shots at all the cattle down there from the grazing rights that are outside the park. So that was in 2006, closed it in 2007. We finalized a management plan in 2010 with cooperation with BLM, Game and Fish, you name it. Today, these are photo plot studies that we monitor annually, and this is an area that we could do better. So RJ will talk to some of that as lessons learned. We could do better in some of these areas, and that's for us to grow. But these are regrowing, all the trees, the shrubs. Back in the day, you could see all the way through the brush to the river. I mean, because they were cutting all the low branches down. And today it's all growing back. And some of the management plans that you have to do or implement is, what do you do to control it? These are the management steps. We've put fence all around the edges of the park up there to stop that. Do they get cut all the time? Yes, but you have to stay on top of it. And this is the conceptual plan in partnership with Game and Fish, who's helping to fund some of the, because we do have a boat launch down here. We are creating a entryway, a formal entryway, and host sites that'll be here. And we'll have a trail that comes all the way on the south side. We'll have backcountry camping, and then you can drive to this point, and this part's pretty much gone. We had a flood a couple years ago, and it just took out the whole bottom end. So you can't drive really back here without falling off the edge. So when the hosts are here, is the only time you can vehicularly drive down there. And the capacity established is totally related to the parking, because we're really trying to keep it pristine. We didn't create any parking along the route. It's like you get here, you stop. When it's full, the gates get shut. And when someone comes out, another one can come in. Because we really, really want to try to keep this as pristine as possible.
A lot of different tools there. So, you have the VERP and the Walrus, and then how that relates to the management with your levels of acceptable change, rapid assessments, and, the various other plans that we use. And then they kind of come together to produce adaptive management. And a lot of these things that we do are intuitive. We don't even realize that we're doing some of these things sometimes. That's just how us land manager types were raised and bred, to just think intuitively in this way. And you'll begin to see how these various tools really overlap with each other, and the data can be used in multiple ways. And really the bottom line is you need to use the tool that works for your agency and works for your project, because that might be different each time. But most of all, don't lose sight of your professional judgment, because there's no tool out there that can replace good, sound, professional judgment.
Okay, so as I said at the beginning, there are really a host of planning management tools that we look at. We've talked about just a couple of them today. But as I also said, it's really following a basic planning model, and that's what you have here. A lot of them just start with scoping, planning criteria, inventory, formulating ideas, evaluate alternatives, implement, monitor, evaluate, adapt, and then you go back to the scoping and you go kind of back through the whole thing. So all of those tools, a couple that we talked about and a couple of others, are just pieces that we pull from, depending on the resource, depending on visitor experience that we want, depending on management. And what we've come to call that really is adaptive management. And I just want to give you a quick definition of adaptive management. And this comes from the U.S. Department of Interior that manages the National Park Service. And they say adaptive management is a systematic approach for improving resources and visitor management by learning from management outcomes. So it's a very iterative process. Its origin is based in the work of Frederick Taylor on scientific management, and really rooted in parallel planning and management concepts found in business, experimental science, hypothesis development, systems theory, and industrial ecology. Now, from a resource management standpoint, the context, it involves decision making, looking at environmental characteristics, and many times multiple and competing management objectives. And as I mentioned early on when we looked at our budget and where our revenues come from, that tends to be a big indicator in how we're going to manage, how we're going to plan, and what tools we're going to use. It involves only predicting how natural resource systems are likely to respond to interventions and identify what management options are available and what outcomes are desired, as Jennifer mentioned, with limits of acceptable change. Just a couple of key points for you to take away on adaptive management. Adaptive management acknowledges uncertainty and multiple competing management objectives. It's designed to improve understanding of natural resource systems and the outcomes and management interventions. And then finally makes use of monitoring to promote understanding and improve the decision. Again, that learning process. A big part of that, and we have discussed this as staff, and one of the things that I want to bring it kind of back to the Conservation Alliance now, one of our frustrations has always been, we've had the planning tools, we've had the management prescriptions that we know we can use and we know how to use, but given the management constraints that we have in terms of funding, primarily staffing, that kind of thing, the piece that we've really been missing in our total management and then getting back into that iterative process is the science. Understanding with limits of acceptable change, we've done some photo plot monitoring, for example, with the Agua Fria Conservation Area. That's good, but there are certainly more rigorous scientific inquiry that we could do that would help us better monitor and then adapt our levels of management if we had those more rigorous scientific studies on plants. We've worked with Game and Fish quite a bit on the animal science and that part of management, but from the plant sciences, we really haven't gotten into that level, and that's why we're so excited about the Conservation Alliance and what that can bring into it, especially from the evaluation part, and then bringing that into scoping, developing even more rigorous planning criteria to develop management plans, doing inventories that are much more robust than we have right now, not just counting the number of facilities, but going out and doing the flora studies that we just completed at Spur Cross Ranch Conservation Area. So then we can bring that into formulating alternatives and bring, again, the science in to say, here is the level of, here are the numbers or the level of, I think we're doing a saguaro cactus study with the Desert Botanical Gardens too. So we can start to formulate alternatives. Do we need to improve the population? Or what do we need to do to maintain the existing population? And then again, bring that back into the whole revolving cycle of planning. So we're making sure that we are being good stewards and planning for these park resources 100 years from now, 200 years from now, 500 years from now, so it can provide the same level of experience to the public. Again, going back to that whole concept of balance and stewardship, so these resources are there for the public 500 years from now. So that was really the last slide, is areas of improvement and identifying some of these gaps. And again, that's where we need the science folks to come in and help us. What are some of the indicators that we need to really be looking at from a hard sciences standpoint? We do the social scientific research with Arizona State University about every 3 or 4 years to better understand what the needs of our visitors are. But what about the natural resource side? We need to get better at monitoring that and studying that and understanding that. So that's truly one of the gaps that we need to work with the scientific community in trying to identify. And then, again, putting that information back into plans, using adaptive management to help us balance people and the natural environment. So I think basically I've said all of this. At this point, really, we would just like to, and I think we probably only have maybe 5 minutes left, but enter into a discussion or answer questions that you might have. You know, the Agua Fria Conservation Area is certainly a great example for us. And that adaptive management piece, in fact, the Bureau of Reclamation, who is actually the owner of Lake Pleasant, we have a 100-year management agreement. After we did the Agua Fria Conservation Area planning effort, they said, wow, now there's North Lake Pleasant, which is right to the west of northwest of the Agua Fria Conservation Area. It's starting to get the use that the Agua Fria Conservation Area is getting, but it's not nearly degraded the way that was. Let's take what we've learned here and plan that area. So now we have a draft plan for that area that we'll be using. We again have pulled in the human element of it because we had people saying, hey, we like to camp down there, we like to do this, we like to do that. So we've zoned that area off, so there are parts of it that are purely conservation, but other parts that are, I would say, if you look at the recreation opportunity spectrum model, it would be a semi-primitive roded or a roded natural kind of an area, because we're going to be developing or allowing some of the gravel roads that are in there to continue to be used, but we're not going to go to the level of heavy paving in there and heavy camping spots with electrical hookups and all that, but we will designate some camping spots in there so we can control people and understand where they're going and control the numbers. So again, we've taken that adaptive philosophy and said, how can we now make this planning process for North Lake Pleasant better? And that's what we're doing. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Jeff, yes.
When you got the Vulture mine property, what kind of initial studies did you do? You know, what was your due diligence, I guess, in getting into that? And is that ongoing?
Absolutely, it's ongoing.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was with our Vulture Mountain planning, what kind of planning efforts did you go through? What kind of planning steps? What things did you look at? And again, part of it was purely driven by management objectives and financing. We had about $100,000 to do a master plan for 71,000 acres. Any of you that have done master plans, you know 100,000 might do a plan in most cases for a 20-acre park. So we had to spread that out. I think we did a fairly good job. We looked at the natural resources that were there. We borrowed from whatever was out there. The archaeology studies, BLM had done some in the past. State parks had done some historic preservation studies in the past. So we mined that data as much as we could. We mined data. We went to the flood control district and looked at all the washes and the corridors in there. So really, it was a data mining effort, looking at current uses. Held a number of public meetings. With the Hassayampa River Preserve component, we were actually fairly surprised that the Nature Conservancy did not have more rigorous scientific studies of a riparian zone, of a riparian area. We're quite surprised at that. So yes, it's definitely ongoing. Those are some of the things that we know that we need to do and will continue to do.
Do you feel you have a benchmark now that you're working with? Or?
I think we do have a benchmark. Again, I think it would behoove us very early on. Spurcross and now Cave Creek, we're doing a flora study with the Desert Botanical Gardens and the Conservation Alliance. Once we have those, all of our county parks will have a flora study done. Some of them are very old and need to be redone. But that would be certainly a first step that we need to look at with the Vulture Mountains, is doing a flora study, especially in the riparian area. Yeah.
But I'm just going to add, because we work with the BLM, one of the things that we have to do is an environmental assessment on those properties. So those get really detailed.
And so that'll be a next step too, before we can actually do any development in that area. We're just at the process now of doing a recreation patent, so we know we have the land, and then what are our next steps there? We need to patent the land and then do the environmental assessment. So those will be next steps on that property. So it will be ongoing for the next 4 or 5 years. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in on the science front. So I'm Brian Sullivan, a professor at ASU. And I've worked on the amphibians and reptiles of the county and Phoenix parks for the last 40 years. And actually showing that picture of the Agua Fria, I'm going home today to put the finishing touches on a 40-year update of Table Mesa Road crossing, which is what we called it historically, because that's where 2 toad species have hybridized up until the expansion of Waddell Dam in '94 that kicked them up to Black Canyon City. But my point is not to be patting myself on the back, but to let you know that in fact, myself there, Julie Stromberg's done a number of studies at Hassayampa. So if the scientists at ASU were contacted, were engaged, there's a wealth of science. I've got 20 papers on that, Table Mesa Road crossing and these toads, and have pictures. When you showed the picture of the trash, if you just went back and had a flood event of '93, you would clean that entire floodplain 200 meters across, and all of that vegetation would be gone, and it comes back. Anyway, for what it's worth, I've got cards here. I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to know anything about amphibians and reptiles at any of the county or city parks, because that's what my students and myself do, is to monitor those, and have published a number of papers about how they've changed over the years, why we lost horned lizards at one and not at another. So there is a wealth of information out there.
And thank you for that comment, because that's one of the things now we've started learning and working with the Conservation Alliance, bringing again science in with the park professionals and the resource professionals. quite honestly, I didn't realize up until 6 months ago we had flora studies for all of our parks. I knew we had some, but I did not know we had all of them done. So this has been a real revelation for us too, finding out that some of the data is already out there. We just need to start applying it, but we're also going to need the scientists to tell us, how do we apply this?
Sure.
You know, how do we take that and turn it into management actions that improve the ultimate natural resources that we have? So.
And my funny is we need the scientists to interpret it.
Yeah.
Speaking of funding, I know that's something you mentioned many times. How much are you able to utilize volunteers in any kind of monitoring efforts or data collection efforts that you do? Because I'm from the McDowell-Sonoran Conservancy, and we recently started a research center within the Conservancy called the Field Institute, and our data collection is driven, I'd say 95% by volunteers.
I have that document on my desk right now.
Wonderful.
Looking at. So that's, again, one of the things working with the Conservation Alliance is trying to figure out the citizen science project. Like I mentioned early on, we double our staff in terms of operating our parks. So we've done a very good job at volunteer management to assist us in park operations. Again, now that next step is bringing in the other side, those folks that are not just interested in helping us manage our parks, but helping us better understand them and manage them then from an ecological standpoint.
Yes.
So.
I have 2 points I just wanted to make. One, this is a very common conundrum where science exists, but it never gets into the hands of the people who need it and can use it, right? So this is one of our goals in the Alliance, is to get the scientists connected with the land managers, and I think we're really starting to do that. So that we can draw on that already existing information and then do a gap analysis basically and say where are we missing information, where can we get grad students and PhD students and faculty members on the job to fill those gaps for the managers. And secondly, because community engagement is a key piece of the mission of the Alliance, citizen science is at the top of our list as well. So the floristic inventories that we're in the midst of undertaking right now, just starting with the county at Cave Creek Regional Park, and then with the city at the Sonoran Preserve and here at North Mountain, those are all through citizen botanists. So we are trying to capitalize on that volunteer base as well to not only operate the parks, but to get the science so that we can operate the parks even better, right?
That's right.
For 500 years plus.
Right, forever. Right. Any other questions? I just wanted to make that clear. Yes?
Is anything planned to preserve the state land around Pyramid Peak, do you know? And is anything being done to preserve it until it becomes a park? If it is?
Does anybody have any information on that? I am not aware of that. No?
No, we've talked, we've been working with the Desert Foothills Land Trust for Daisy Mountain up in the Anthem area, but I haven't heard of the other.
Around Pyramid Peak. What's your name?
Chris what?
Chris? If you email me, I will try to get information for you on that and see if I can find anybody that's working toward that
Okay, thank you.
right now. Hi, Dan. Yes.
You mentioned working with ASU to assess visitor experience. What kinds of things are you doing? What kind of tools are you using to do that?
We have a visitor survey, and it goes back probably 15 or to the early 90s. So we have some fairly good longitudinal data on our visitor experience and what our visitors want. And we've tried to, I guess, improve that data collection tool over the years, but also tried to maintain some semblance of sameness with the questions so we can track that from a longitudinal standpoint. So there are certainly some things, but we've certainly seen trends change. I mean, for great example on trails is mountain biking. You know, mountain biking in the early 90s was a very, very small component. Sometime in the late 90s, it far and away surpassed horseback riding, And now it's not too hiking yet, but it's certainly up there. So that's certainly, again, just from an activity standpoint, something that we need to be prepared to address. And we frankly have, to some level, we've developed competitive tracks at 3 of our parks to kind of push that extreme experience mountain biker, if you will, to say, here's an area for you to do that kind of activity. So, but yeah, we've looked at a whole host of it. And in the last several, we even started collecting economic impact data so we can have a better understanding of how much are people spending when they come to a county park. Always good data to throw up in front of our political friends.
That's something they're working with College of Public Programs, School of Community Resources and Development on.
To further expand on the economic impact component.
Who's doing your visitor use surveys?
Mega Budrick.
Is that through School of Community Resources and Development?
Dale, did I say your last name? Budrick, okay. And then Deepak Shabra is working to help take some of that initial data that we've collected and turn it into a more, I guess, robust economic impact analysis, but then also give us some ideas for even strengthening our economic impact data, which will probably obviously take more data collection and cost more money, but ASU is, does it as low cost as they can. So yeah, on the social scientific side of things, we've been working quite strongly too. And I have a background, and I think both of these folks have a background in the social scientific side of things. So we're fairly comfortable with that, again, working with ASU. But again, it's the hard sciences that we really want to stress and be good stewards, or to be good stewards, we need to look at that much more closely.
Are there any other questions or comments? Yes.
My concern with all this is applying all these great ideas. How do we convince the city, the county, and the state to keep building the parks program? I mean, we're park stewards, we're volunteers. My dream job was to be a park ranger with the mountain preserves. The mountain preserves here in Phoenix are down to maybe 30 rangers from 100, 10 years ago. The job isn't getting done on the ground. What can we do?
I think I wish Ken were here and Mark stepped out. I think one way to do that is to demonstrate the value of the parks. So one of the goals of the Alliance is to promote this system, and that's both through education and outreach, but also through straight marketing and media kinds of efforts. So we're not there just yet, but I think one great way to demonstrate value is to show the dollars, the hard dollars, that come as a result of having this park system in place. So we're working diligently with the county right now to do this economic impact analysis, but I think we'll be able to extrapolate from that a little bit the value of the system. Demonstrating ecological value to me would be like the whole 9 yards. If we could get some of those ecosystem service studies underway or things like that. But demonstrating value, I think, is one way we can, because it's kind of a chicken or egg thing, right, too? Because if the parks are degraded, people value them less, and then they don't get funded when bond things come about and whatever. We also need champions like you that are out there, doing the work and making your voice heard, in our community. So we'll do our best on our end. But does anybody else have any other ideas about how to move the needle at the funding level? Because I think that's a key piece. When users and certain kinds of activities are driving what funds the park, well, clearly, they get the biggest piece of the pie when it comes to running and planning and managing the parks. So, yes?
That's a bit of a paradigm shift, I think, because people that are angry about things like maybe policing or crime or what have you are going to make their voices known. And they're going to be down at the council chambers or the whatever, demanding that something be done. people that recreate, those are feel-good things, and we don't always think in terms of, yeah, we take them for granted. We'd always go down and insist on better funding, better facilities, better opportunities, and that's why I say it's a paradigm shift. We really got to get out to the communities and let them know that if they don't let their voices be heard, nothing's going to change in that regard.
We've conducted citizen surveys, interest surveys in Peoria. We're completing our master plan today. And it identifies what the citizens' interests are, at least in this particular round. And when you have that type of support, maybe it does allow for an opportunity to be able to look at those type of bonding programs or taxation programs that may be supported for quality of life issues. But you really have to, it's a high political issue as well, because we're moving into a year of elections for our key areas, and they're looking at reducing taxes, so which is going to reduce funding overall and have other financial impacts throughout the organization. So it's, you know.
So you need actors at all levels. You need community level actors, you need people acting, advocating from above, and then you need this kind of sort of mid-level where we have these organizations interacting with one another toward this too. I think it needs to come from all sides.
Timing is critical.
Timing, as well. Absolutely.
As you pull it together. After those settle down, there may create some open window opportunities where you can address some of those particular needs if you've got the instruments in place or the surveying data in place.
The data, we need the data. That is for sure. Dale, you were going to say something.
Well, if you look at the federal government, the fact that the Land and Water Conservation Fund has been frozen for the last 20 years, even though there's a dedicated revenue stream that supports it, it's indicative of how that trickles down at the state, county, and local level. Everyone wants parks. Everyone wants trails. But when it comes down to the policy decision to operate it, to sustain the park rangers, to be able to put in the vegetation that's necessary, to be able to monitor areas where you can close trails in order to bring it back and the like, there has to be an educational system with those very same decision makers. We need the Bruce Babbitts of the world, the Morris Udalls of the world to be back out on those trails. And those are the ones that really need to be our spokespeople, not us, because we don't have the influence that the public safety folks do when there's drugs and murders, or transportation people when our highways are too full. So until or unless we can get the champions that actually do vote, that actually do make those decisions. And I do believe that if and when LWCF does actually become a reality again, I think that may help start the pendulum back to the way it was in that golden era of the 80s and 90s. And then we've been void for all these past years.
Yeah, I was just going to say, coming from the nonprofit perspective, the way we've kind of been able to circumnavigate that a little bit is to be a nonprofit that has its own funding mechanisms and sort of is apart from the system, and we're able to do a lot that way. I know that a lot of parks have friend groups who do a lot of the work and can also be, you know, pretty big engines for funding as well. So it may be a quicker way around it.
I love that idea. I always feel like the moment we give up the ghost in that way, we give up the responsibility of the county and the city to care for this space. We've done it forever. It's really hard to pull that back once you let it go. I think as a support mechanism, I mean, the Conservancy is the best model I can think of for a group of people who have come and stood behind McDowell Sonoran Preserve and really made it what it is, in my opinion, today, and the people of the city of Scottsdale who voted for that to be the case. But I think those things need to serve as support. This is just my opinion. They need to serve as support, not as the core base of funding. Yes, Jim.
Just one last observation. It really comes out of the sequestration and the economic downturn is agencies that were islands unto themselves. BLM managed their stuff, Maricopa County Parks managed their things, Peoria managed, you know, and none of the twain shall meet. Once we got into this economic situation, we all discovered pretty much at the same time that we can't do anything individually, but we can do things cooperatively. Absolutely. And we have this new feeling, I think, amongst, I mean, it's all the way from federal all the way down to the municipal level, where we're looking at new partnerships, new areas to cooperate with. So it's not just my park and my region and this, it's what can we do to work together. And even with the nonprofits and the conservation groups, it takes, I guess you might say it takes a village to put together an open space or a park plan.
One final kind of comment, and it really goes back to what you said about the conservancy, and you mentioned the Sonoran Preserve. I think maybe we need to look at shifting our model of how we fund and develop and then maintain parks as well. The concept, you know, what I've tried to promote with our county board of supervisors is you have a role to the future generations to be stewards of this property. So help in preserving additional open space and help in the stewardship aspects of the parks. And then we will ask the visitors who can afford to pay for services. And then it gets into who can afford to pay and who can't, and what programs can you put in place to help those that can't afford to. But then asking those that can afford to pay for services to pay for services. So that's certainly a paradigm shift, and some of my fellow colleagues would throw eggs at me for saying that, but I think that may be a model that we're going to have to start looking at, is visitors are going to have to be, or be expected to pay for some of the services that they are directly provided, and then we may be asking the larger governments to protect the resources and help us be good stewards of those resources for the long term. So I think there are a variety of models that we can look at, and I think that kind of a partnership model of a government and a nonprofit, or a government and a parks department, as you saw, with 13% of our operating budget is general fund. I think it should be a little bit higher, but then we could take some of those dollars and put them more into stewardship efforts and still expect the visitor to pay for the services that they get. But again, a personal kind of opinion, or a personal philosophy of how we could continue to fund parks at an optimal level.
I hadn't been thinking like that. Good thoughts all the way around. Thank you for your comments and the discussion. It's what we're all here for today, and I would like to invite any of you that are interested in interfacing more directly with the Conservation Alliance to send me an email, and we'll see you know, how we can start collaborating more. And I totally agree. It really is about these siloed ways of approaching things. It hasn't worked. It hasn't worked in academia. It hasn't worked in land management, and so we're seeing a lot more of this interdisciplinary and inter-organizational kind of partnerships, and I think that's terrific. So anyway, thank you all for joining us today, and we'll